At 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in November 2023, the emergency alarm system at Irongate Federal Penitentiary screamed through corridors designed to contain the worst of humanity. Guard Rodriguez sprinted towards cell block D, his boots echoing against concrete walls that had witnessed countless acts of violence, but nothing quite like what awaited him in the narrow corridor between cells 20 and 25. Marcus Thompson's body lay in a spreading pool of blood beneath flickering fluorescent lights, his correctional officer uniform shredded by what the medical examiner would later catalog as 47 distinct stab wounds. The shank, a sharpened cafeteria spoon with its handle wrapped in torn bedsheet, lay 15 feet away from the body, as if casually discarded after completing its purpose. Thompson's eyes stared at the ceiling, frozen in an expression that combined shock with what investigators would later describe as recognition, as though he had known exactly who was coming for him and why. But the detail that would haunt Detective Sarah Chun for months afterward wasn't the brutality of the attack or the precision of the wounds that suggested multiple attackers working in coordinated savagery. It was the security footage from cell 47, time-stamped at exactly 10:19 p.m., showing Victor Mendoza sitting calmly on his bunk, reading The Count of Monte Cristo, never once standing or even glancing toward his cell door as screams echoed through the block. The camera angle captured his face perfectly as he turned a page at 10:20 p.m., and for just a moment, the smallest smile crossed his features before disappearing back into the mask of complete neutrality. Victor Mendoza had been a ghost in Irongate's population for 8 years, serving life without parole for a murder that began as an armed robbery gone catastrophically wrong. At 42, he had transformed from the desperate automotive shop owner who killed a security guard during a panicked escape attempt into something far more dangerous. A man who understood that physical freedom meant nothing compared to the power of absolute patience and strategic intelligence. Before prison, Victor's life had followed a predictable trajectory of hard work and modest success. He met Carmen Rodriguez at community college, both enrolled in an automotive technology program that seemed beneath their actual intellectual capabilities but promised stable income and the satisfaction of working with their hands. Carmen, with her organized mind and attention to detail, transitioned into medical billing at Riverside General Hospital. Victor built a small automotive repair shop that earned enough to fund a comfortable life in a modest house with a well-maintained yard and dreams of eventual expansion. Their marriage had been solid in the way of couples who genuinely liked each other beyond the romance, who shared inside jokes and finished each other's sentences and made plans for a future that stretched decades into comfortable retirement. They had deliberately chosen not to have children, both preferring to focus on careers and the freedom to travel when finances allowed. For 12 years, their lives hummed along with the unremarkable contentment of people who had found their place in the world. Then came the night in 2015 when Victor's shop faced bankruptcy from a combination of predatory loans and a major client's sudden closure. Desperation drove him to the luxury car dealership at midnight with a gun he barely knew how to use, intending only to steal enough inventory to cover his debts. When the security guard surprised him in the showroom, Victor's panicked shot killed a 62-year-old grandfather working his last shift before retirement. The irony of destroying 2 lives in a single moment wasn't lost on Victor during the trial that sentenced him to life without the possibility of parole. Carmen stood by him through the trial and the first 3 years of incarceration, driving 90 minutes each way every Thursday afternoon to sit across from her husband in Irongate's visiting room. She brought news of the outside world, photographs of family gatherings he would never attend, and increasingly desperate optimism about appeals that both of them knew would fail. She wore her loneliness like a second skin, visible to anyone who looked closely enough to see the woman slowly disappearing behind the mask of devoted prison wife. By year 6 of Victor's sentence, their marriage existed only in the technical sense of paperwork filed in government offices. Phone calls had become awkward exercises in finding safe topics that avoided the growing distance between them. Carmen's visits continued like clockwork every Thursday, but the conversations grew shorter and the silences longer until they sat across from each other like strangers performing a ritual neither remembered choosing. Marcus Thompson had been working at Irongate for 6 years when he first noticed Carmen Mendoza in the visiting room. At 34, Thompson carried the controlled bearing of his 4 years in military police, combined with the emotional isolation of a man whose divorce 2 years earlier had left him living alone in government housing with nothing but a gym obsession to fill the hours between shifts. He was professional to a fault, known among both staff and inmates for treating everyone with the same measured distance that prevented either familiarity or hostility. Thompson worked the night shift rotation that included Thursday evenings, which meant he often saw Carmen signing in for her visits with Victor. He noticed her the way lonely people notice beauty, as both attraction and reminder of everything missing from their own lives. She dressed professionally for visits, maintaining her appearance with a care that suggested pride despite circumstances. Her natural warmth came through in how she interacted with other visitors waiting in the processing area, offering tissues to crying children and kind words to nervous first-time visitors navigating the dehumanizing security procedures. The photograph that would trigger everything waited in Thompson's wallet for 6 months before Victor Mendoza ever saw it. Thompson had taken it himself during one of the chance encounters that transformed two lonely people into conspirators in mutual betrayal. Carmen's car had broken down 2 miles from Irongate on a Thursday evening in April 2023, and Thompson, recognizing her from the visiting room, stopped to help. The conversation while waiting for the tow truck felt easy in the way that surprises people who have forgotten what genuine connection feels like. Within 3 weeks, they were texting daily about neutral topics that gradually became less neutral. Within 6 weeks, they met for coffee at a cafe 30 minutes from both their lives, where they could pretend to be ordinary people on an ordinary date rather than a prison guard and an inmate's wife building toward disaster. The photograph Thompson carried showed Carmen in her summer dress at Riverside Park, smiling with genuine happiness for the first time in years, captured during their third meeting outside the careful boundaries of professional distance. By October 2023, their affair had settled into a routine that felt both thrilling and inevitable. Carmen visited Victor every Thursday at 2 p.m., maintaining the fiction of devoted wife while guilt consumed her from the inside. Then she drove to the roadside motel where Thompson waited in room 114, and for 90 minutes they pretended they were normal people making normal choices that wouldn't destroy lives. Thursday nights she told Victor on their monitored phone calls that she was tired from the long drive and went straight home, when actually she spent those hours in Thompson's apartment, sleeping beside a man who represented everything her marriage to Victor could never provide again. Touch, intimacy, the possibility of a future. October 12, 2023, began as a routine morning in cell block D. Victor Mendoza stood with his hands against the wall of cell 47 while guard Marcus Thompson conducted a standard shakedown, searching for contraband that prisoners manufactured from the limited materials available in their controlled environment. These searches happened weekly, performed by rotating guards following protocols designed to maintain order through random inspection and the constant reminder that privacy was a privilege that ended the moment someone committed a crime serious enough to earn them time at Irongate. Thompson's wallet fell from his back pocket as he bent to check beneath Victor's bunk, its contents spilling across the concrete floor in a scatter of plastic cards and paper currency. The photograph landed face up between them, Carmen's smile frozen in that moment of genuine happiness at Riverside Park, the summer dress Victor recognized because he had bought it for her birthday 3 years earlier, before everything turned to ash. Time stopped in that cell as both men stared at the image. Thompson scrambled to retrieve the wallet, his hands shaking as he stuffed everything back inside while stammering an excuse about finding it in the parking lot. Victor remained perfectly still against the wall, his face betraying nothing of the calculations racing through his mind. He had spent 8 years learning to control every visible reaction, to present only the mask that served his purposes, while his actual thoughts remained locked behind walls more secure than Irongate's perimeter. "No problem, boss," Victor said in the same neutral tone he used for every interaction with guards. "Accidents happen." Thompson completed the search with trembling hands and left cell 47 within 3 minutes, desperate to escape the awkward tension. Victor sat on his bunk and stared at the wall for the next 3 hours, not moving, barely breathing, while his mind assembled the puzzle pieces into a picture that explained every strange detail he had noticed over the past 6 months. Carmen's distracted air during visits, her guilty expressions when discussing her week, the way she seemed relieved when their phone calls ended, the gradual distance that he had attributed to the natural decay of a marriage strained by incarceration. The photograph hadn't shown her with another man, but Victor knew his wife well enough to recognize the look in her eyes. That was the expression she used to wear when looking at him in the early years of their marriage, before he destroyed their future with a single panicked gunshot. Someone else was making Carmen smile like that now, and the fact that guard Marcus Thompson carried her photograph in his wallet meant that someone was the man who walked cell block D every Thursday during visiting hours. Victor made his decision in that quiet cell, while the afternoon sun painted shadows across concrete walls. He felt no rage, no passionate fury that might lead to reckless action. Instead, he experienced the cold clarity of a chess master recognizing the position on the board and knowing exactly how the game must end. Thompson had violated every boundary between guard and inmate, had stolen what belonged to Victor, had transformed weekly visits into opportunities for betrayal. Such violations demanded response, but the response had to be perfect, untraceable, devastating. Victor Mendoza wasn't going to kill Marcus Thompson himself. He was going to make Thompson's death a masterpiece of collaborative destruction that would leave Victor's hands literally clean while his conscience remained unburdened by guilt. After all, he had 8 years of accumulated favors, carefully maintained relationships across 3 cell blocks, and most importantly, time to plan something that would terrify investigators with its precision. 6 months earlier, in April 2023, Carmen Mendoza had no intention of betraying her husband when her 10-year-old sedan made grinding noises on the rural highway 2 miles from Iron Gate Federal Penitentiary. She pulled onto the shoulder and sat with her hands on the steering wheel, fighting tears that had nothing to do with car trouble and everything to do with the reality of another Thursday drive to sit across from a man who felt more like a stranger every week. Marcus Thompson had been driving home after his shift when he recognized the disabled vehicle. He had seen Carmen every Thursday for months, always arriving at exactly 2 p.m., always maintaining her composure through the degrading security checks, always treating everyone with a kindness that seemed incompatible with the environment that had swallowed her husband. Stopping to help seemed like simple professional courtesy, the kind of thing any decent person would do for someone stranded on a highway notorious for lacking cell service. "Car trouble?" Thompson asked through her window, his tone carefully neutral in the way he had learned to maintain with everyone connected to Iron Gate's population. Carmen looked up at the man she recognized from Thursday visits and felt the complicated shame of needing help from someone who represented the system that had caged her husband. "It's been making noises for weeks. I should have dealt with it sooner." Thompson called for a tow truck and waited with her, maintaining appropriate distance while they made awkward conversation about neutral topics. The unusually hot spring weather, the terrible cell service in this area, the challenges of maintaining older vehicles. When the tow truck finally arrived 45 minutes later, Carmen thanked him with genuine gratitude and handed him a coffee shop gift card she kept in her glove compartment for emergencies. "You didn't have to do that," Thompson said, surprised by the gesture. "You didn't have to stop," Carmen replied. "But I'm glad you did. Thank you for treating me like a person instead of just inmate property." That comment haunted Thompson for 3 days before he texted the number she had provided for emergency car questions. His message thanked her for the gift card and asked if her car situation had been resolved. Her response came within minutes. Relieved to have someone to talk to who didn't judge her for choices she was increasingly questioning herself. The text messages began as genuinely innocent conversations between 2 lonely people who happened to share a connection through Iron Gate's concrete walls. Carmen described her work at Riverside General Hospital's billing department, the satisfaction of solving insurance puzzles and helping patients navigate bureaucratic nightmares. Thompson shared stories about his gym routine and his struggles to find meaning in a job that felt more like warehousing humans than actual corrections. Neither of them acknowledged the growing frequency of their messages or the way conversations stretched later into the evening. Neither admitted that they saved certain messages to reread during difficult moments. Neither recognized the emotional affair developing through screens until Carmen suggested meeting for coffee to properly thank him for his roadside assistance. The cafe they chose sat in a town 30 minutes from both Iron Gate and Riverside, neutral territory where they could pretend to be ordinary people having ordinary coffee instead of a prison guard and an inmate's wife walking toward disaster with eyes wide open. Carmen arrived first, choosing a corner table that offered privacy while maintaining the appearance of casual public meeting. When Thompson walked through the door in civilian clothes, she barely recognized the man who looked so different outside his correctional uniform. What was supposed to be 45 minutes of polite conversation became 3 hours of the kind of deep connection that surprises people who have forgotten what it feels like to be truly heard by another person. Carmen talked about the loneliness of loving someone who existed only in 2-hour weekly segments and monitored phone calls. Thompson described the isolation of his post-divorce life and the way working in prison made normal relationships feel impossible when he couldn't explain what his days actually entailed. The first kiss happened in the cafe parking lot 4 meetings later, both of them leaning against Carmen's newly repaired car while the sun set, and their excuses for why this had to stop evaporated in the magnetic pull of mutual need. Thompson pulled away first, apologizing for crossing boundaries he knew better than to violate. Carmen grabbed his shirt and pulled him back, tired of boundaries and rules and all the ways her life had become smaller than the dreams she used to have. Within 2 months, their affair had established patterns that felt both inevitable and carefully orchestrated. Every Thursday, Carmen maintained her visiting schedule with Victor, sitting across from her husband for 2 hours while guilt consumed her from the inside. Then she drove to the roadside motel where Thompson waited in room 114, the same room every week, paid for in cash that left no paper trail connecting them. The sex felt like absolution and sin simultaneously, each encounter deepening both their connection and the lies required to sustain it. Thompson knew the security protocols for Thursday visiting days, knew exactly when Carmen would be leaving Irongate, knew how to time his arrival at the motel, so they were never seen together in the parking lot. Carmen became expert at compartmentalization, keeping her Victor life and her Marcus life in separate mental containers that she refused to let touch. The phone calls between Carmen and Victor grew more strained as the affair progressed. Victor, isolated in his cell, noticed the changes in his wife's voice but attributed them to the natural exhaustion of maintaining their impossible situation. Carmen told herself that she was protecting Victor from truths that would devastate him, that her happiness with Thompson didn't diminish her commitment to weekly visits and the appearance of faithful wife. By September 2023, Thompson had begun suggesting that Carmen file for divorce. They lay in the motel bed after their Thursday ritual, and he stroked her hair while painting pictures of the future they could have together. An actual relationship without secrets or shame. Weekend trips to places beyond this town. Maybe eventually marriage, children, the normal life that prison had stolen from both of them in different ways. Carmen listened to these fantasies and felt the gulf between what Thompson was offering and what her life actually allowed. Divorcing an inmate serving life without parole carried its own complications. The social stigma of abandoning a spouse in prison, the guilt of taking away the one connection Victor had to life beyond bars, the practical reality that divorce proceedings required confronting Victor with her betrayal. "I need more time," she told Thompson every time he raised the subject. "It's complicated. We've been doing this for 5 months," Thompson replied during their last conversation before everything shattered. "How much more time do you need?" What neither of them knew was that Victor Mendoza had already assembled enough evidence to understand exactly what Thursdays meant for his wife and the guard who walked cell block D with the confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. The photograph in Thompson's wallet was simply the final confirmation of what Victor had been suspecting for weeks, the trigger that transformed careful observation into active planning. Victor's investigation began subtly, using the networks he had cultivated over 8 years of prison survival. His cellmate's girlfriend, grateful for protection Victor had provided her boyfriend during a gang situation, agreed to follow Carmen after one Thursday visit. The photographs she texted to a contraband burner phone showed Carmen's car pulling into the motel parking lot, followed 10 minutes later by a man the girlfriend couldn't identify from distance but whose build and bearing matched guard Thompson perfectly. The burner phone found its way into Victor's possession through the same underground economy that moved contraband throughout Irongate's population. Victor studied the photographs in the privacy of his cell, analyzing them with the same methodical attention he had once applied to automotive diagnostics. Carmen entering room 114, a man following, both emerging 90 minutes later with the body language of satisfied lovers. The final photograph captured them in a goodbye kiss that left no room for innocent interpretation. Victor deleted the images and destroyed the phone, needing no physical evidence when the truth was already burned into his memory with perfect clarity. He began mapping the social networks of Cell Block D with new purpose, identifying every man who owed him favors or held grudges against Thompson or simply had nothing to lose from participating in coordinated violence. During his Thursday phone calls with Carmen, Victor tested her with careful questions that she answered with increasingly elaborate lies. How was her day? Just worked, came straight home. Any plans tonight? No, too tired from the long drive. Everything okay with you? Fine, why do you ask? Each lie added to Victor's mental catalog of betrayals, strengthening his resolve that what he was planning wasn't murder but justice. The correction of an imbalance that the law would never address because the law didn't recognize what Thompson had stolen. This wasn't about passion or jealous rage. This was about restoring order to a universe that had been knocked catastrophically off its axis by a guard who thought his uniform made him immune to consequences. The planning consumed 6 weeks of careful recruitment and strategic positioning. Victor approached each potential participant individually, framing his request in language that appealed to their specific motivations. For some, it was accumulated debt they owed for Victor's past interventions. For others, it was personal grudges against Thompson for disciplinary write-ups or perceived disrespect. For a few, it was simply the nihilistic satisfaction of violence when you're already serving life without possibility of parole. Nobody questioned why Victor wanted Thompson dead. In the ecosystem of Irongate Federal Penitentiary, guards who violated boundaries became targets of collective resentment, and Thompson's affair with an inmate's wife represented the kind of boundary violation that justified response in the moral calculus of imprisoned men. Victor presented his plan as collaborative justice, diffusing responsibility across 12 participants so that no single person bore the weight of murder. The beauty of Victor's strategy lay in its organizational complexity combined with individual simplicity. Each participant knew only their specific role. Be ready Thursday night, wait for the signal. Attack when the opportunity presents itself. Return immediately to your cell. Nobody except Victor understood the full scope of coordination required to ensure 12 men attacked the same target in the same narrow window of time, creating the diffusion of responsibility that would make prosecution nearly impossible. The weapons materialized through the same patient accumulation that characterized Victor's entire approach. Cafeteria spoons disappeared one at a time over 2 weeks, each theft spaced far enough apart to avoid triggering inventory concerns. The sharpening happened during quiet hours, metal scraped against concrete with the patience of men who had nothing but time. Handles wrapped in torn bedsheet, the fabric chosen deliberately to leave no distinctive fibers that might trace back to specific cells. Victor tested none of this himself, never touching the weapons or providing explicit instructions that could be recorded or remembered accurately enough for courtroom testimony. Instead, he offered suggestions and observations that more violent men interpreted as orders. Thompson works alone in cell block D on Thursday nights. Someone should probably remember that. Cafeteria spoons sharpen up pretty good if you have enough patience. 12 men attacking at once means nobody knows who did the actual killing. The network understood what Victor was building without him ever having to explicitly say it. This was how power worked in places like Irongate, through suggestion and implication rather than direct command, through cultivated relationships rather than temporary transactions. Victor had spent 8 years becoming the kind of prisoner that guards respected and inmates trusted, and now he was cashing in that accumulated social capital for one perfectly coordinated act of revenge. On the Thursday before Thompson's murder, Victor received his final visit from Carmen. She seemed particularly distressed, her usual composure cracking around the edges in ways that suggested guilt was finally overwhelming her capacity for deception. Victor, knowing exactly why she seemed upset, played the role of concerned husband with Oscar-worthy commitment. "What's wrong, baby?" he asked, reaching across the visiting room table to hold her hands. "Nothing," Carmen lied, her voice breaking slightly. "Just tired. Work has been stressful." "You seem different lately," Victor observed, watching her face carefully for reactions. "Is everything okay with us?" Carmen's eyes filled with tears she couldn't quite explain without confessing everything. "I just miss you so much. This is so hard." "Soon things will change," Victor promised, the words carrying meanings Carmen couldn't possibly understand. "I love you more than anything. Never forget that." Carmen left that visit shaken by Victor's unusual warmth after months of growing distance. She drove to her meeting with Thompson and reported that Victor seemed off, almost too affectionate. Thompson, focused on his own growing frustration with their situation, dismissed her concerns with the casual arrogance of someone who believed he understood prison dynamics better than an inmate's wife. "He's in prison," Thompson said. "Everyone's off. It doesn't matter what he thinks or knows because he can't do anything about it from in there." Those words would echo in Thompson's mind during the final 90 seconds of his life, when he realized too late that the most dangerous prisoners aren't the ones who fight with their hands but the ones who fight with their minds. The creation of 12 murder weapons required the kind of patience that only men serving life sentences truly understand. Time becomes currency in prison, measured not in hours or days but in the slow accumulation of resources and opportunities that ordinary people take for granted. Victor Mendoza orchestrated the weapons manufacturing without ever touching a single implement. His instructions delivered through careful suggestions during yard time and library exchanges that left no traceable evidence of coordination. Ramon Razor Cruz handled the initial theft of cafeteria spoons, taking one every 3 days during meal service rotations when different guards supervised the dining hall. Razor had earned his nickname through 15 years of enforcement work for various prison gangs, developing expertise in creating shanks from materials that institutional security considered harmless. He owed Victor a debt that went beyond the usual prison currency of cigarettes and commissary credit. Victor had intervened when Razor's younger brother faced a gang initiation beating in a different cell block, using his network to ensure the boy received protection without the requirement of joining the very organization threatening him. The spoons disappeared into Cell Block D's infrastructure through hiding spots that had existed long before Victor arrived at Iron Gate. Ventilation shafts with loose grates, gaps behind toilets where plumbing created natural cavities, tears in mattresses that could be sewn shut with thread pulled from prison uniforms. Each spoon began its transformation in a different location, sharpened against concrete during the quiet hours between midnight and dawn when most guards walked their rounds with the exhausted inattention of people working night shifts. Isaiah "Ice" Washington supervised the sharpening process with the methodical precision that had made him a successful drug kingpin before his arrest. Ice controlled 15 inmates through a combination of fear and respect, his network extending beyond Cell Block D into the general population where his reputation preceded him. He owed Victor for connections that ensured his elderly mother received proper medical care when insurance companies denied her cancer treatments. A debt Ice considered sacred in the moral economy of men who valued family loyalty above all else. The sharpening technique Ice taught his team came from decades of prison knowledge passed between generations of inmates. Hold the spoon at a 30-degree angle against the cell floor. Apply steady pressure rather than aggressive force. Work the edge in consistent strokes until the metal develops the kind of razor sharpness that can penetrate flesh and muscle with minimal resistance. Test the edge against the callous skin of your palm. If it draws blood with gentle pressure, the weapon is ready. Derek "Demon" Patterson wrapped the handles in strips of bedsheet torn into precise widths that provided grip without excessive bulk. Demon's nickname came from his history of psychotic episodes that required frequent isolation in administrative segregation. Episodes that guards like Thompson had learned to handle with pepper spray and physical restraint that left bruises and deeper psychological wounds. Demon held grudges with the single-minded intensity of someone whose mental illness made forgiveness neurologically impossible. When Victor suggested that Thompson deserved punishment for his boundary violations, Demon heard it as permission to act on rage he'd been nursing for 3 years. Terrence "T-Bone" Jackson coordinated the distribution of completed weapons to the 12 designated participants, moving each shank through the underground network that transported contraband throughout Iron Gate's supposedly secure environment. T-Bone had personal motivation beyond simple debt to Victor. Thompson had written him up 3 times for contraband violations that cost T-Bone 6 months of good behavior credit and delayed his parole eligibility by 2 years. The mathematical precision of that punishment lived in T-Bone's mind as injustice requiring correction, and Victor's plan offered satisfaction that the official grievance process would never provide. The final week before Thompson's murder, Victor moved through Cell Block D with the calm purposefulness of a general reviewing troops before battle. His interactions with each participant appeared casual to surveillance cameras and guard observation, brief conversations during yard time, book exchanges in the library, wordless nods during meal service. But each contact carried coded confirmation that the plan remained on schedule, that weapons were prepared, that participants understood their roles in the coordinated attack. Victor's communication system relied on nonverbal signals that left no evidence for investigators to analyze. A hand touching the left shoulder during yard time meant confirmation of Thursday night timing. A specific book checked out from the library, The Count of Monte Cristo, appropriately enough, signaled that final preparations should begin. A particular seating arrangement at Monday dinner confirmed that all 12 participants remained committed despite the approaching reality of what they had agreed to do. The contingency planning revealed Victor's strategic intelligence most clearly. If caught, participants would claim spontaneous group attack motivated by Thompson's history of abusive behavior toward inmates. If interrogated separately, they would provide contradictory details that made coordinated prosecution impossible. If pressured to name a ringleader, they would identify Carlos Martinez, a 58-year-old inmate dying of pancreatic cancer who had nothing to lose from accepting responsibility for organizing violence he would never live to be punished for. Victor's own role remained carefully insulated from direct involvement. He would be in cell 47 during the attack, visible on security cameras, his hands literally clean of blood and weapons. His alibi was perfect because it was genuine. He wasn't going to participate in the actual murder, just create the conditions that made it inevitable and ensure that 12 desperate men understood what needed to happen without him ever explicitly ordering it. The psychological warfare Victor conducted during that final week demonstrated his understanding of human nature and emotional manipulation. During his last visit with Carmen, he performed affection with the skill of an actor who understood his audience completely. He held her hands across the visiting room table, looked into her eyes with warmth that seemed genuine, told her he loved her more than anything in the world. Carmen, consumed by guilt over her affair with Thompson, broke down crying at Victor's unexpected tenderness after months of growing distance. She couldn't explain her tears without confessing everything, so she blamed work stress and the exhaustion of their situation. Victor, knowing exactly why she was crying, played the concerned husband with perfect commitment to the role. "What's wrong, baby?" he asked, his voice carrying just the right mixture of worry and affection. "Nothing," Carmen lied, wiping tears with the back of her hand. "Just tired. This is all so hard." Victor leaned forward, lowering his voice to the intimate tone they used to share before prison destroyed their marriage. "I know I've been distant lately. The reality of life without parole, it gets to me sometimes. But I need you to know something." Carmen looked at him, seeing her husband's face overlaid with memories of who they used to be together. "Soon things will change," Victor continued, choosing his words with the precision of someone who understood their multiple meanings. "I'm making peace with our situation. I want you to be happy, Carmen. You deserve happiness." Those words haunted Carmen for days afterward, their ambiguity suggesting either acceptance of their failing marriage or something she couldn't quite identify. She left that visit shaken, driving to her Thursday meeting with Thompson in a state of confusion that made her question everything about the choices she had been making. "Victor seemed different today," she told Thompson as they lay in room 114 of the roadside motel, the same room where they had been meeting for 6 months of increasingly complicated betrayal. "He was warm, almost too affectionate. Said things will change soon and he wants me to be happy." Thompson, focused on his own frustration with their stagnant situation, dismissed her concerns with the casual arrogance of someone who believed he understood prison dynamics better than he actually did. "He's manipulating you, trying to keep you visiting. Inmates do that when they sense their wives pulling away." "Maybe," Carmen replied, unconvinced but willing to accept Thompson's interpretation because it allowed her to avoid confronting the guilt that consumed her during every interaction with her husband. What neither Carmen nor Thompson understood was that Victor's warmth wasn't manipulation designed to maintain her visits. It was the satisfaction of a chess master watching the endgame unfold exactly as planned. Victor had no interest in preserving their marriage. He wanted Thompson dead and Carmen destroyed by the knowledge that her affair had triggered a murder she never saw coming. Thompson's final day alive began with the unremarkable routine of someone who had no reason to suspect his life was measured in hours. He woke at 9 in the morning in his government housing unit 3 miles from Irongate, a sparse apartment that reflected the empty life of a man who worked nights and spent his days either at the gym or sleeping. His morning routine followed the same pattern as every Thursday: shower, breakfast of protein shake and oatmeal, 90 minutes of weightlifting that served as meditation and escape from the emotional complexity of his affair with an inmate's wife. Thompson texted Carmen at 11. "Miss you, baby. Tonight after my shift." Carmen's reply came within minutes. "Miss you too. Midnight." Thompson smiled at his phone, imagining the future they had been planning, where Thursday meetings became every night, where secrecy transformed into legitimate relationship, where he could introduce Carmen to his estranged family as his girlfriend instead of hiding their connection like shameful addiction. He had no way of knowing that he would be dead before midnight, that Carmen would spend the rest of her life replaying their text exchange and wondering if she could have prevented what was coming by simply being honest with her husband. Lunch with fellow guard Rodriguez provided the last normal human interaction of Thompson's life. They met at a diner near Irongate where correctional staff gathered to complain about administration and swap stories about the daily absurdities of warehouse work disguised as rehabilitation. Rodriguez, observant in the way of friends who actually pay attention, noticed Thompson's unusually good mood and pushed for information. "You've been different lately," Rodriguez said over burgers and coffee. "Lighter, happier. Got a girl, don't you?" Thompson deflected with the practiced ease of someone maintaining a secret that could cost him his career. "Just working out more, eating better. Makes a difference." Rodriguez laughed, shaking his head. "Brother, I've known you 6 years. This isn't gym endorphins. This is the look of a man getting regular affection. Just be careful, yeah? Our job makes relationships complicated enough without adding extra drama." The warning carried unintended prophecy that neither man recognized. Thompson promised to be careful, finished his burger, and drove to Irongate for the 6 p.m. shift change, his mind already planning the midnight meeting with Carmen that would never happen. The shift briefing revealed nothing unusual scheduled for Thursday night. Warden Sullivan ran through standard protocols, noting that Thursday nights historically showed lower incident rates than weekends when visiting day frustrations combined with yard time restrictions to create volatile conditions. Thompson was assigned to cell block D, the same rotation he worked most Thursday nights, walking corridors where Victor Mendoza sat in cell 47 counting down the hours until his carefully orchestrated revenge would unfold. Thompson's routine patrol at 7 p.m. brought him past Victor's cell. Through the small window in the solid door, he could see Victor sitting on his bunk reading, completely absorbed in his book. Victor glanced up, made brief eye contact, and nodded with the respectful neutrality that characterized his interactions with guards. Thompson nodded back, feeling uncomfortable tension he couldn't quite identify but attributed to the awkwardness of the photograph incident weeks earlier. What Thompson didn't realize was that Victor's calm represented the satisfaction of a plan reaching its final stage. The weapons were distributed. The participants were ready. The distraction in cell block B was scheduled for 10:15. Everything was positioned perfectly for the coordinated attack that would leave Thompson dead and Victor's hands literally clean. At 10 p.m., Thompson conducted his routine headcount, walking cell block D's corridors and confirming that each inmate was present in their assigned cell. The count came back perfect. 87 inmates accounted for. All doors secured. No unusual activity or behavior that warranted additional attention. Thompson radioed confirmation to Central Control and settled into the quiet rhythm of night shift supervision, monitoring cameras and walking periodic patrols through corridors designed to prevent privacy and maintain constant surveillance. At 10:15, the distraction began in cell block B exactly as Victor had orchestrated. A trash can fire triggered smoke alarms and emergency protocols that pulled 75% of available guards to the opposite side of Irongate's sprawling complex. Thompson heard the commotion through his radio, the urgent calls for fire suppression and inmate control that created the chaos necessary for the next phase of Victor's plan. At 10:17, the medical emergency call came from cell 23. An inmate reported severe chest pains and difficulty breathing, symptoms that required immediate response under federal protocols protecting institutions from lawsuits over inadequate medical care. Thompson grabbed the medical kit from the guard station and moved toward cell 23, walking into the narrow corridor between cells 20 and 25 where 12 men waited in their cells with sharpened spoons wrapped in bedsheet, counting down seconds until their coordinated emergence would transform Marcus Thompson from living person into crime scene photograph. Thompson had no idea he was walking into an ambush planned with military precision by a man who never left his cell. He had no idea that his affair with Carmen Mendoza had been discovered 6 weeks earlier, or that the discovery had triggered a conspiracy involving 12 inmates, multiple weapons, and coordination that would demonstrate the terrifying efficiency of prison networks when properly motivated. He had 90 seconds left to live, and he spent them walking towards cell 23 with the confidence of someone who believed his uniform made him untouchable. The attack began at 10:19 and 30 seconds when Ramon, Razor Cruz's cell door slid open with the mechanical whisper of locks, disengaging through the override system that Isaiah "Ice" Washington had compromised through a maintenance worker who owed favors that extended across multiple cell blocks. Thompson looked up from his medical kit to see Razor emerging into the corridor, the sharpened cafeteria spoon visible in his right hand, its wrapped handle dark against his prison uniform. "Cruz, back in your cell immediately," Thompson commanded, his voice carrying the automatic authority of someone trained to project control in volatile situations. His right hand moved toward the pepper spray canister on his belt while his left reached for the radio to call for backup, standard protocol when confronting an inmate outside their cell during lockdown hours. The second cell door opened before Thompson's fingers reached either weapon. Ice Washington stepped into the corridor from cell 18, blocking the retreat path with the deliberate positioning of someone executing a rehearsed plan. Thompson's training kicked in with the sudden clarity of recognizing genuine danger. This wasn't random violence or individual breakdown. This was coordinated attack requiring immediate defensive response. Thompson's hand closed around the pepper spray canister, pulling it free of the belt clip and raising it toward Razor's advancing form. His thumb found the trigger mechanism while his training screamed conflicting instructions. Spray the closest threat, radio for backup, retreat to defensible position, maintain verbal commands to establish compliance attempts for later investigation. In the fraction of a second it took Thompson to process these options, 10 more cell doors slid open along the corridor. The mathematics of the situation became instantly, horrifically clear. 12 inmates emerging simultaneously from cells that should have been locked, each man carrying an improvised weapon, each face showing the focused intensity of people committed to collective violence. Thompson keyed his radio with desperate urgency. "Code red, Block D, officer needs." Razor's shank struck the radio from Thompson's hand mid-transmission, the weapon moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been rehearsing the strike angle for days. The radio clattered down the corridor, its transmission cut off before Thompson could complete the emergency call that might have brought help in time to save his life. Thompson squeezed the pepper spray trigger, catching Razor directly in the face with the chemical agent that normally incapacitated even the most aggressive inmates. Razor screamed and stumbled backward, hands clawing at his burning eyes. But his retreat meant nothing because 11 other attackers were already closing the distance. Thompson swung his baton in a wide arc, the heavy weapon connecting with Ice Washington's jaw in a blow that shattered teeth and sent blood spraying across the corridor's concrete walls. Ice fell to his knees, stunned by the impact, but his collapse created an opening for Derek Demon Patterson to dart forward with his shank extended. The first penetrating wound came at 10:19 and 45 seconds, Demon's shank entering Thompson's right shoulder with the precise angle of someone who had studied human anatomy in prison library medical texts. Thompson felt the steel punch through muscle and scrape against bone, the pain immediate and overwhelming in its intensity. He tried to swing the baton toward Demon, but his right arm wouldn't respond properly, the shoulder damage disrupting nerve signals and muscle control. Terrence T-Bone Jackson struck from Thompson's left side, his shank targeting the kidney with medical knowledge provided by an inmate who had trained as an EMT before his incarceration. "This is for my 2 years, boss," T-Bone hissed as the weapon penetrated deep into soft tissue, the whispered words audible on the security camera audio that investigators would analyze obsessively in the weeks following the murder. Thompson's legs collapsed under him, the combination of wounds and shock overwhelming his body's ability to maintain balance. He fell to his knees on the corridor floor, hands pressed against his shoulder, and sighed in futile attempts to stop bleeding that was already soaking through his uniform. The other 8 attackers surrounded him in a tight circle, their shanks rising and falling with mechanical precision as they delivered the remaining 43 wounds that the medical examiner would catalog during autopsy. The attack happened in near silence except for Thompson's screams and the wet sound of metal penetrating flesh. The inmates worked with focused efficiency, each man delivering their assigned strikes before stepping back to allow the next attacker access. The coordination suggested extensive rehearsal, timing exercises where they had practiced the rhythm of collective violence until it became choreographed murder performed with terrifying precision. Thompson remained conscious through most of the 90-second attack, his training and physical conditioning keeping him aware even as massive trauma shut down his body's systems. He tried to crawl toward his radio, fingers scraping against concrete as he pulled himself forward with whatever strength remained. Demon kicked him onto his back, and Thompson's final view of the world was 12 faces looking down at him with expressions ranging from savage satisfaction to detached professionalism, as though they were completing an unpleasant but necessary task. "Please," Thompson managed to whisper through blood filling his throat. "Carmen." The final wound came from Ice Washington's shank, driven directly into Thompson's heart with the anatomical knowledge of someone who understood exactly where to strike for immediate death. Thompson's eyes went vacant at 10:20 and 20 seconds, his body going still while blood continued pooling beneath him in quantities that would later help forensic analysts estimate the attack's duration. The 12 attackers stood over Thompson's body for approximately 5 seconds, each man processing what they had just done through their own psychological filters. Then Razor, despite his streaming eyes from the pepper spray, called out the retreat order. "Everyone back, now." The return to cells happened with the same coordination that characterized the attack. Each inmate moved to their designated cell, weapons wiped hastily on clothing before being hidden in prearranged locations that would later be discovered empty, because Victor's plan included disposal methods that left no physical evidence connecting specific inmates to specific weapons. Cell doors closed within 30 seconds of the retreat order, and silence fell over cell block D except for the dripping sound of blood hitting concrete from Thompson's cooling body. In cell 47, 80 feet from the murder scene, Victor Mendoza sat on his bunk reading The Count of Monte Cristo, with the calm absorption of someone completely uninvolved in the commotion echoing through the corridor. Security camera footage would later show that Victor never stood during the attack, never even glanced toward his cell door during the screaming. At 10:20 precisely, he turned a page of his book, and for just a moment, the smallest smile crossed his features before disappearing back into perfect neutrality. The discovery came at 10:23 when guard Rodriguez, responding to reports of disturbance in cell block B, heard screaming from cell block D and ran toward the sound. What he found in the corridor between cells 20 and 25 would feature in his nightmares for the rest of his career. Marcus Thompson's body surrounded by blood in quantities that seemed impossible for a single human to contain, the 47 stab wounds visible even through the shredded uniform, the expression of frozen horror that suggested Thompson had been conscious and aware during most of his murder. Rodriguez keyed his radio with shaking hands. Officer down, cell block D, corridor 3. I need immediate backup and paramedics." The institutional response happened with the practiced efficiency of an organization that drilled for exactly these emergencies. 15 guards flooded cell block D within 60 seconds, securing every inmate in their cells and establishing perimeter control. Paramedics arrived 4 minutes later, but their assessment was immediate and obvious. Marcus Thompson had been dead for at least 3 minutes, his body already cooling, his injuries catastrophically beyond any intervention that might have saved him. Warden Marcus Sullivan arrived at 10:35, his presence commanding immediate silence from the guards and staff who had gathered in the corridor. Sullivan had supervised Irongate for 12 years, managing one of the most violent federal facilities in the system, but even his extensive experience couldn't prevent the visceral shock of seeing one of his guards murdered with this level of coordinated brutality. "Lock it down," Sullivan ordered, his voice carrying the controlled fury of someone who understood that this attack represented catastrophic failure of every protocol designed to protect staff from inmate violence. "Nobody moves. Nobody talks to anyone outside this facility until we understand what the hell just happened here." The initial search of cell block D revealed 3 shanks hidden in cells 8, 14, and 39, none belonging to the actual participants in Thompson's murder. The planted evidence followed Victor's contingency planning perfectly, directing investigation toward inmates who could credibly deny involvement while the real weapons had already been destroyed through methods that left no recoverable evidence. The inmate interviews conducted between 10:45 and 2 in the morning followed predictable patterns. Every prisoner claimed to have been asleep during the attack, to have heard commotion but stayed in their cells as protocols required, to have no knowledge of planning or coordination or who might have wanted Thompson dead. The wall of silence was absolute, maintained through fear of Victor's network and the unwritten code that snitching meant death in facilities like Irongate. When investigators reached cell 47, they found Victor Mendoza sitting calmly on his bunk, his book marked at page 287, his hands and clothing completely free of blood or any other evidence of participation in violence. The security footage confirmed what Victor knew would be his perfect alibi. He had never left his cell, never even stood during the period when Thompson was being murdered 80 feet away. Terrible tragedy, Victor told the interviewer with carefully calibrated sympathy. Guard Thompson seemed like a professional officer. I hope you catch whoever did this. The investigator, studying Victor's unnaturally calm demeanor, felt instinctive suspicion but had no evidence to justify it. Victor's alibi was airtight, documented by cameras that showed he couldn't have physically participated in the murder. The fact that he showed no reaction to the violent commotion would be noted in reports but couldn't constitute proof of involvement in planning. At midnight, Carmen Mendoza waited in room 114 of the roadside motel wearing the lingerie Thompson particularly liked. Wine opened on the nightstand, candles lit to create the romantic atmosphere they both craved after 6 months of meeting in utilitarian rooms designed for transient encounters. Her phone showed no messages from Thompson, unusual for someone who typically confirmed their meetings with eager frequency. At 12:30, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Carmen answered with growing dread. "Hello, is this Carmen Mendoza?" The voice was official, controlled, carrying the careful neutrality of someone delivering terrible news. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Irongate Federal Penitentiary Administration. We need you to come to the facility immediately." Carmen's blood went cold. "Why? Is Victor okay? What happened?" "It's not about your husband, ma'am. It's about guard Marcus Thompson. There's been an incident." The 90-minute drive to Irongate happened in a blur of panic and prayers that meant nothing because Thompson was already dead and cooling in the facility's morgue by the time Carmen merged onto the highway. She called Thompson's phone obsessively, each call going directly to voicemail, each unanswered ring increasing her certainty that something catastrophic had happened. She texted, "Marcus, please answer. They called me to come to Irongate. What's going on?" No response would ever come. Carmen arrived at Irongate Federal Penitentiary at 1:47 in the morning to find the parking lot flooded with police vehicles and news vans already gathering like carrion birds sensing tragedy. The administrative building glowed with harsh fluorescent light that spilled through windows usually dark at this hour, creating the surreal atmosphere of institutional crisis management in full operation. A uniformed officer intercepted her at the entrance, checking identification before escorting her through security protocols that felt simultaneously familiar and completely alien given the circumstances. Detective Sarah Chun waited in a small conference room designed for attorney consultations, her 15 years investigating prison homicides evident in the controlled exhaustion that comes from processing violent death as routine professional responsibility. Chun had transferred to the Major Crimes Division from Chicago specifically because of expertise developed through her brother's death in a prison riot 7 years earlier, transforming personal tragedy into professional mission that made her particularly effective at navigating the complex politics of institutional violence. "Ms. Mendoza, please sit down," Chun said, gesturing toward a chair across from her at the utilitarian table. Her voice carried practiced neutrality designed to keep witnesses calm during the delivery of information that would fundamentally alter their understanding of reality. Carmen sat with trembling hands, her mind racing through possibilities that ranged from heart attack to car accident to anything except the truth that waited in Chen's carefully prepared opening statement. "What happened? Where's Marcus? Is he in the hospital?" Chun leaned forward slightly, maintaining eye contact in the way trained investigators learn to watch for reactions that reveal consciousness of guilt or genuine surprise. "Marcus Thompson was killed tonight in the line of duty. He was murdered by inmates in cell block D. I'm very sorry. The conference room tilted sideways as Carmen's brain refused to process words that made no sense in any configuration of reality she could construct. Marcus dead. Murdered. Inmates. The concepts existed separately in her understanding but couldn't connect into coherent meaning. She heard herself screaming from a distance. The sound of her own grief filtered through shock that created dissociative separation between mind and body. Guards helped her into the chair when her legs stopped supporting her weight, their practiced efficiency suggesting this wasn't the first time they had witnessed family members collapsing under the weight of violent death delivered in sterile administrative environments. Someone brought water that Carmen couldn't drink, tissues she couldn't use, sympathetic words that meant nothing against the roaring emptiness opening inside her chest. Chun waited with professional patience for the initial shock to pass, watching Carmen's reactions with the analytical detachment of someone trained to recognize authentic grief versus performed emotion. What she observed was genuine devastation complicated by something else, a layer of guilt or fear that suggested Carmen's relationship with Thompson extended beyond casual acquaintance through visiting room protocols. "How did you know Guard Thompson?" Chun asked once Carmen's screaming had dissolved into silent tears. Carmen froze, her mind suddenly calculating the implications of honesty versus the habit of deception that had governed her life for 6 months. My husband is incarcerated here. I saw Thompson during my Thursday visits. That's all." Chun pressed, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer made Carmen's response a test of credibility rather than information gathering. The room felt smaller suddenly, walls closing in with the claustrophobic pressure of choices that couldn't be unmade. Carmen had spent 6 months lying to everyone in her life. Victor, her family, her friends, herself, about the affair that now felt like the most monumentally stupid decision she had ever made. But sitting across from a detective investigating Marcus Thompson's murder, continuing that pattern of deception seemed both impossible and potentially catastrophic. "We were involved," Carmen whispered, the admission feeling like physical injury. "We were having an affair." Chen's expression shifted subtly, professional interest sharpening into focused attention that suggested this information changed the entire trajectory of investigation. "Involved how, specifically?" "We were sleeping together. We'd been seeing each other for 6 months, since April. Meeting after my visits with Victor." The words tumbled out with the desperate momentum of confession, each sentence stripping away another layer of the carefully constructed fiction Carmen had been maintaining. "Does your husband know about the affair?" Chen asked, leaning forward slightly. The question landed with the force of revelation, connections forming in Carmen's mind with terrible clarity. The timing of the murder, Thursday night, hours after her visit with Victor. The location, cell block D, where Victor had been incarcerated for 8 years. The coordination required for multiple inmates to attack the same guard simultaneously. None of this could be coincidence. "Oh my God," Carmen breathed, her hands covering her mouth as the full horror of realization crashed over her. "Victor. Did Victor do this?" Chun maintained careful neutrality, but her silence confirmed everything Carmen needed to know. "Why would you think your husband was involved?" "Because he found out," Carmen said, her voice rising with panic. "He must have found out somehow. Marcus had a photograph of me. Victor saw it during a cell search weeks ago. I thought maybe he didn't understand or didn't care, but..." She trailed off, understanding now that Victor had understood perfectly and cared enough to orchestrate murder with the patient precision she should have recognized as his defining characteristic. "When was this photograph incident?" Chun asked, already making notes that would form the timeline connecting discovery to revenge. "October 12th, I think. Marcus mentioned that Victor seemed suspicious during a shakedown, that he'd seen a picture. But Marcus said it didn't matter because Victor couldn't do anything from inside prison." The bitter irony of Thompson's dismissive confidence now felt like prophecy ignored. "We were so stupid. We thought we were safe because he was locked up." Chun spent the next 3 hours extracting every detail of the affair from Carmen. When it began, how often they met, what Victor might have known or suspected, whether Carmen had noticed any changes in her husband's behavior after the photograph incident. The interrogation revealed the complete timeline of betrayal that provided motive clear enough to convince any jury that Victor Mendoza had reason to want Marcus Thompson dead. But motive meant nothing without evidence of coordination, and Chen's initial review of security footage showed Victor's perfect alibi. He had never left cell 47 during the attack, never communicated with other inmates in ways that cameras could document, never touched weapons or participated in planning conversations that left traceable evidence. The man had orchestrated a murder while sitting on his bunk reading classic literature, turning his cell into command center that controlled 12 men through methods that left no prosecutable proof. Chen's investigation expanded rapidly as dawn broke over Irongate's razor wire perimeter, her team of forensic specialists analyzing every aspect of the crime scene for evidence that would connect planning to execution. The blood spatter patterns confirmed what eyewitness accounts couldn't provide: 12 distinct attack angles, suggesting that many participants surrounded Thompson in coordinated assault. The wounds themselves told their own story through depth and precision, each strike designed to cause maximum damage rather than random violence of spontaneous rage. The medical examiner's preliminary report documented 47 separate penetration wounds distributed across Thompson's torso, shoulders, and neck, with what appeared to be deliberate targeting of vital organs and major blood vessels. Several wounds showed hesitation marks suggesting some attackers struggled with the psychological reality of killing another human being, while others demonstrated the confident technique of people who had stabbed before or practiced extensively on inanimate objects. The weapon search revealed the 3 planted shanks in cells that belonged to inmates with no connection to Thompson or Victor, obvious misdirection that confirmed sophisticated planning rather than spontaneous violence. But the actual murder weapons had vanished into Irongate's infrastructure through disposal methods that demonstrated institutional knowledge possessed by long-term inmates familiar with every hiding spot and vulnerability in the facility's security systems. Breaking the wall of silence proved more challenging than Chen had anticipated. The first 24 inmates interviewed maintained absolute consistency in their responses. They had been asleep, heard nothing useful, knew nothing about planning or coordination. The uniformity of their stories suggested either remarkable coincidence or carefully rehearsed cover story distributed through networks that operated beyond official surveillance. The breakthrough came on the 5th day of investigation when Terrence T-Bone Jackson requested private meeting with investigators. At 24, T-Bone was the youngest participant in Thompson's murder, serving his first violent offense sentence and psychologically unprepared for the weight of having killed another human being. The nightmares had started immediately, vivid replays of his shank penetrating Thompson's side, while the guard screamed and tried to crawl towards safety that would never arrive. Chun recognized T-Bone's vulnerability immediately and exploited it with the practiced skill of investigator, who understood that young offenders crack under pressure that career criminals endure without visible strain. "We know you were involved, Terrence. We have forensic evidence placing you at the scene." The statement was partially bluff. Forensic evidence was inconclusive about specific participants, but T-Bone's guilt-ridden conscience couldn't distinguish between actual proof and investigative theater. "I wasn't the only one," he blurted, the words escaping before his prison-educated better judgment could stop them. "Tell me who else participated," Chin said, keeping her voice carefully neutral rather than triumphant. T-Bone provided 4 names before his courage failed and institutional survival instincts reasserted control. But he refused to identify the organizer, his voice dropping to terrified whisper when Chun pressed for information about who had coordinated the attack. "I can't. He'll kill my family. You don't understand what he's capable of." "Who are you talking about?" Chin demanded. T-Bone shut down completely, refusing to speak another word despite Chen's increasingly aggressive questioning. But the crack in the wall had formed, and Chun understood how to widen it into complete collapse. The second confession came from Derek "Demon" Patterson, whose documented history of psychiatric episodes made him simultaneously unreliable witness and potentially controllable through medication adjustments and isolation that exacerbated his paranoid delusions. Demon had no family outside prison to protect, but he feared Victor Mendoza's reach within the institutional population where transfers and cell assignments could be manipulated to place Demon in vulnerable situations. "We all did it together," Demon admitted during his interrogation, rocking back and forth in his chair while describing the attack with disturbing clinical detail. "Thompson had it coming. Everyone knew he was dirty. sleeping with an inmate's wife. That kind of disrespect can't stand. Who organized the attack? Chen asked. Demon's eyes widened with genuine fear, his paranoia focusing on threats Chen couldn't see but Demon believed absolutely. If I tell you, I'm dead. Not just me but anyone I care about. He has people everywhere. Connections you can't imagine. The refusal to name Victor directly demonstrated the effectiveness of his network. Even inmates willing to confess to murder itself wouldn't implicate the puppet master who pulled strings while maintaining plausible deniability. Chun needed evidence that connected Victor explicitly to planning, communication that proved coordination rather than coincidental timing. The forensic breakthrough came from unexpected source, the photograph that had triggered Victor's revenge. Thompson's wallet had been logged as evidence, and forensic specialists examining it noticed the torn edge on Carmen's picture, suggesting it had been ripped from larger photograph. Enhanced imaging revealed partial shoulder of second person in the original image, clothing style and posture consistent with Victor Mendoza based on comparison with prison intake photos from 8 years earlier. The timeline reconstruction showed that Thompson's wallet had fallen during the October 12th shakedown of Cell 47. Security footage capturing both men's reactions to the photograph's discovery. Victor's calm contrasted sharply with Thompson's obvious panic, body language that suggested guilty conscience on Thompson's part and calculating observation on Victor's. Chun built her case through circumstantial evidence that individually meant little but collectively painted damning picture. The 5-week gap between photograph discovery and murder matched the planning window necessary for recruiting 12 participants and manufacturing weapons. The participants themselves all had documented connections to Victor through the favor network he had cultivated over 8 years. The attack's coordination required leadership from someone with authority and strategic intelligence, characteristics that described Victor Mendoza perfectly. But the most devastating evidence came from Carmen's confrontation with Victor during the monitored visit Chen arranged 3 weeks after Thompson's murder. Carmen walked into the visiting room trembling with rage and grief and terrible certainty about her husband's involvement, while Victor sat calmly with the small smile of someone who had won a game Carmen only now realized they had been playing. "Did you do this?" Carmen demanded without preamble. Victor leaned back in his chair, studying his wife with the detached interest of scientist observing experimental results. "Do what, baby? You know exactly what I mean. Marcus, did you have him killed?" "How could I?" Victor replied, spreading his hands to indicate the obvious constraints of his incarceration. "I was in my cell the whole time. You can check the cameras. Stop playing games." Carmen's voice broke with anguish. "Did you kill him because of me? Because we were together?" The silence stretched between them like physical presence, Victor's steady gaze holding Carmen's desperate eyes until she understood that his non-answer communicated everything she needed to know without providing anything investigators could use as confession. "You're asking if I defended my marriage?" Victor finally said, his voice carrying philosophical curiosity rather than guilt. "If I reminded everyone whose wife you are?" "He didn't deserve to die," Carmen whispered. "Didn't he?" Victor's tone remained conversational, discussing abstract ethics rather than specific murder. "A man who violated his duty, betrayed his oath, disrespected the sanctity of marriage vows? What punishment does that kind of behavior deserve?" Carmen stood abruptly, chair scraping against floor. "I want a divorce. I'm done. We're finished." Victor laughed, the sound carrying genuine amusement. "Divorce? Carmen, we're bound together forever now. You think you can just walk away from this? Watch me." "You were complicit," Victor said quietly, his words chosen with surgical precision to inflict maximum psychological damage. "Your affair gave me motive. Your visits gave me information. Your lies made you an accessory. We're in this together, baby. Till death do us part." Carmen fled the visiting room and collapsed outside, understanding with crushing finality that Victor was right. She had created the circumstances that led to Marcus Thompson's murder as surely as if she had held one of the shanks herself. The guilt would consume her for the rest of her life, but in that moment all she could feel was the horrible satisfaction of Victor's revenge spreading to envelope her in its destruction. Chun watched the entire exchange through one-way glass, recording every word for later analysis. Victor had admitted nothing that could be used in court, but he had confirmed his psychological involvement in ways that strengthened Chen's circumstantial case. The investigation was building toward prosecution, but Chen understood that convicting a defendant with perfect alibi would require jury to believe in conspiracy proved through patterns rather than direct evidence. The mass indictment came 6 weeks after Marcus Thompson's murder. 12 inmates charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy in coordinated attack that represented catastrophic failure of Irongate's security protocols. District Attorney Michael Torres held a press conference announcing the charges, standing before cameras with the grim determination of prosecutor who understood this case would define his career one way or another. These men acted with premeditated malice, Torres declared, coordinating their attack with military precision to murder a correctional officer who dedicated his life to public service. We will pursue the maximum penalties available under federal law. The charges against the 12 direct participants were straightforward. Physical evidence and partial confessions provided clear path to conviction on murder and conspiracy counts. But the 13th defendant created complications that would transform straightforward prosecution into legal battle testing the boundaries of circumstantial evidence and prosecutorial theory. Victor Mendoza was charged with conspiracy to commit murder and solicitation of murder based entirely on circumstantial evidence that suggested his involvement without proving it conclusively. The indictment outlined his motive, discovery of his wife's affair with the victim. It documented his opportunity, 8 years of cultivating influence over Cell Block D's population. It demonstrated his means, the network of indebted inmates who owed him favors that could be called in for coordinated violence. But nowhere in the 200-page indictment could prosecutors point to direct communication where Victor explicitly ordered Thompson's death. The case against him existed in the negative space between documented facts, requiring jury to infer coordination from patterns that defense attorneys would argue proved nothing except coincidence and speculation. Victor's defense attorney, Rachel Morrison, seized on these weaknesses during her opening statement at trial 6 months later. Morrison had built her reputation defending white-collar criminals and corrupt politicians, developing expertise in creating reasonable doubt from circumstantial evidence that seemed damning until examined closely under adversarial scrutiny. The prosecution wants you to believe my client telepathically controlled 12 men, Morrison told the jury, her voice carrying theatrical incredulity. They have no recordings of conversations planning this attack. They have no written communications ordering violence. They have no witnesses who will testify that Victor Mendoza explicitly commanded them to kill Guard Thompson. She gestured toward Victor sitting calmly at the defense table, dressed in civilian clothes that transformed him from prisoner into ordinary middle-aged man whose life had been destroyed by single moment of desperate poor judgment 8 years earlier. What they have is a man whose wife betrayed him, whose marriage was destroyed by a guard who violated every professional and ethical boundary. They have a man who was in his cell, reading a book, when violence erupted 80 feet away. And they want you to convict him of murder based on speculation and assumption rather than actual evidence. The prosecution's case unfolded over 3 weeks of testimony that built circumstantial evidence into persuasive narrative about puppet master who orchestrated murder without leaving fingerprints. Torres called witnesses who documented Victor's influence over Cell Block D's population, guards who testified about the favor network he had cultivated, inmates who described his reputation as problem solver who could make things happen through connections that extended beyond official channels. Carmen Mendoza's testimony provided the emotional core of the prosecution's case, her obvious devastation lending credibility to claims that Victor had discovered the affair and responded with calculated revenge. She described the October 12th photograph incident, Victor's unusual warmth during their final visit before the murder, his chilling comments during their confrontation 3 weeks afterward. He told me we were bound together forever, Carmen testified, her voice breaking with suppressed tears. He said I was complicit because my affair gave him motive and my visits gave him information. He was proud of what he'd done, proud of destroying the man I loved. Morrison's cross-examination focused on Carmen's credibility and motivation to blame Victor for consequences of her own choices. You lied to your husband for 6 months about your affair with Guard Thompson, correct? Yes, Carmen admitted. You betrayed your marriage vows? Violated your commitment to stand by your husband through his incarceration? Yes. And now you want this jury to believe that your husband, the man you betrayed, is responsible for consequences that stemmed directly from your own choices? He orchestrated Marcus's murder, Carmen shouted, losing composure under Morrison's systematic dismantling of her testimony's credibility. That's your interpretation, Morrison replied calmly. But you have no evidence of that beyond your own guilty conscience, seeking someone else to blame for tragedy you helped create. The inmate testimonies created their own complications for prosecution. T-Bone Jackson testified about Victor's suggestion that it would be justice if Thompson faced consequences for his boundary violations, but under cross-examination admitted Victor never explicitly ordered the attack. Razor Cruz contradicted T-Bone's version entirely, claiming the attack was spontaneous group decision motivated by collective resentment of Thompson's perceived abuses. The inconsistencies created exactly the reasonable doubt Morrison needed to undermine prosecution's coordination theory. If inmates couldn't agree on basic facts about planning, how could jury conclude beyond reasonable doubt that Victor had orchestrated the attack rather than simply benefiting from coincidental timing? Victor's decision to testify represented calculated risk that Morrison initially opposed but Victor insisted upon. He understood that juries wanted to hear from defendants, that silence could be interpreted as guilt regardless of instructions about burden of proof. And he believed in his ability to perform innocence convincingly enough to create doubt in at least 3 jurors' minds. On the witness stand, Victor presented himself as wronged husband struggling to maintain dignity despite circumstances beyond his control. He admitted feeling betrayed when he discovered his wife's affair, acknowledged anger that Thompson had violated professional boundaries, but insisted he had never acted on those emotions through violence or conspiracy. "I was hurt, yes," Victor testified in response to Torres's aggressive cross-examination. "My wife's betrayal devastated me, but I'm serving life without parole. I've already lost my freedom, my future, everything that mattered to me. Why would I risk additional charges by involving myself in violence against a guard?" "Because you wanted revenge," Torres shot back. "Because you discovered your wife was sleeping with guard Thompson, and you decided he needed to pay for that betrayal." "I discovered the affair, yes, and it destroyed me emotionally, but I didn't kill anyone. I was in my cell, reading when this terrible thing happened. The prosecution has no evidence connecting me to planning because there is none. These inmates acted on their own grudges against Thompson, and the prosecution is trying to blame me because it's easier than admitting their facility had security failures that allowed 12 men to coordinate an attack." The jury deliberated for 4 days, their extended discussions suggesting genuine disagreement about Victor's guilt. The verdicts, when they finally came, revealed the split that had delayed consensus. All 12 direct participants were convicted unanimously on all counts, but Victor's conviction came on a 10-2 vote that barely met the threshold for guilty verdict under federal procedures. The judge's sentencing hearing 3 weeks later provided opportunity for victims' impact statements that transformed legal proceeding into collective expression of grief and rage. Thompson's mother spoke about the son she had lost to violence that should never have reached him inside facility designed to protect staff from inmate aggression. His sister described the nephews who would grow up without the uncle who had been planning to be more present in their lives once he found happiness in his relationship with Carmen. When Victor's turn came to make final statement before sentencing, he maintained the same calm neutrality that had characterized his entire presentation throughout trial. "I'm sorry for Guard Thompson's death and for the pain his family is experiencing, but I maintain my innocence of these charges. I hope the appeals process will eventually reveal the truth." The judge showed no sympathy in his sentencing statement. "Mr. Mendoza, you orchestrated the brutal murder of a correctional officer through manipulation of desperate men who owed you favors or feared your influence. The fact that you never personally wielded a weapon makes your crime more rather than less heinous, because it demonstrates the kind of calculated evil that transforms prisons into kingdoms where inmates like you wield power that corrupts institutional order." Victor received an additional life sentence to run consecutively with his existing conviction, effectively meaningless since he was already serving life without parole. But the real punishment came in his transfer to administrative segregation in Supermax facility, where he would spend 23 hours daily in 8x10 concrete cell. His contact with other humans limited to brief exchanges with guards during the single hour of solitary yard time permitted under federal isolation protocols. Carmen Mendoza's life disintegrated in the aftermath of the trial. She filed for divorce while Victor was awaiting sentencing, the dissolution of their marriage requiring only his signature since he contested nothing about the separation. Thompson's family sued her in civil court for wrongful death, arguing that her affair had created the circumstances that led directly to his murder. The jury found her liable for $2.3 million in damages that she would never be able to pay, the judgment following her into bankruptcy and beyond. She lost her position at Riverside General Hospital when the publicity made her continued employment untenable, hospital administration citing concerns about workplace disruption and patient comfort. She worked 2 minimum wage jobs to cover rent on a studio apartment that represented catastrophic downgrade from the modest house she had shared with Victor before his incarceration. Therapy 3 times weekly helped manage the PTSD and survivor's guilt that manifested in nightmares where she saw Marcus Thompson's face, asking why she had let him die. The 12 direct participants in Thompson's murder scattered across the federal prison system, most placed in administrative segregation or protective custody for their own safety from inmates who viewed killing guards as unacceptable violation of unwritten codes governing prison violence. T-Bone Jackson, whose cooperation had provided crucial testimony, spent his remaining sentence in protective custody, isolated from general population that would have killed him for snitching. Isaiah "Ice" Washington died in a prison fight 8 months after conviction, stabbed by inmates who viewed his participation in killing a guard as escalation that brought unwanted scrutiny to entire facility. In his supermax cell, Victor Mendoza maintained correspondence with journalists and legal advocates who viewed his case as example of prosecutorial overreach based on circumstantial evidence. He wrote letters insisting on his innocence, describing himself as scapegoat for institutional failures that allowed 12 inmates to coordinate attack under noses of supposedly vigilant security staff. Some observers found his arguments persuasive, questioning whether pattern of connections proved conspiracy or simply demonstrated coincidental timing that prosecution had shaped into narrative of guilt. But Detective Sarah Chun, reviewing the case files in her office 2 years after trial concluded, felt no doubt about Victor's involvement or guilt. She had spent enough time studying his methodical intelligence, his patient cultivation of influence, his complete lack of remorse during the monitored visit with Carmen. The man had turned his cell into command center and 12 desperate inmates into weapons, all while maintaining alibi that technically proved he never left his bunk. Sometimes the guilty don't leave evidence, Chun told new investigators during training sessions where she used the Mendoza case as example of sophisticated criminal intelligence. Sometimes they're smart enough to insulate themselves from direct involvement while orchestrating everything from behind walls that are supposed to contain them. That's when we have to build cases from patterns and connections, trusting juries to understand that absence of evidence isn't the same as evidence of absence. The question that haunted everyone who knew the case remained unanswered even years after the verdicts. Was the tragedy inevitable once Carmen and Thompson began their affair? Or did series of small choices lead 3 people down path they never intended to walk? Carmen asked herself this question every morning when she woke from nightmares of Marcus's death. The 12 inmates asked it in their isolated cells where they would likely die. And Victor, sitting in his supermax cell reading books and maintaining his innocence, believed he knew the answer with complete certainty. He had defended his marriage using the only tools available to a man serving life without parole. He had reminded everyone whose wife Carmen was and what happened when boundaries got violated in places designed to maintain absolute hierarchies of power. Whether that made him murderer or wronged husband defending his honor remained question that different observers answered according to their own moral frameworks. 47 stab wounds. 12 attackers. 1 puppet master who never touched a weapon. 3 lives destroyed by affair that seemed like escape from loneliness but became invitation to catastrophe. The story of Victor Mendoza and Marcus Thompson and Carmen would be studied in criminal justice programs and debated in ethics classes and remembered by everyone at Irongate Federal Penitentiary as cautionary tale about the invisible violence that prisons contain and occasionally unleash. In the end, the most dangerous person wasn't the one holding the shank. It was the one sitting calmly in his cell, reading about revenge, while other men's hands did the work his intelligence had orchestrated with the patience of someone who understood that time means nothing when you have nothing but time.